So from our perspective, and Justin's 100% right. For me, what Uncle Tom 2 does is it showcases this era of Black prosperity that we're not traditionally told about in the mainstream media. And when I say mainstream media, I'm talking about organizations like NPR, which is constantly putting out, stories of Black America as they see it. And it's constantly depicting Black America as being oppressed, as being under the thumb of the white man, as being hated by this country. But what we found when we dug in, to the archives is that Black America was thriving in the 1900s, from the early 19 to the mid 1900s, not in spite of the white South, but in some cases with the help of the white South. And so what we found is that race relations between white and Black in the South were actually far more harmonious than kind of oppressive, like we're constantly told about. And so we're able to show these beautiful photos and just this footage of things that are not just frankly talked about in the mainstream media. And to the extent that they do talk about it, it's always kind of tainted with this kind of oppressive message that is meant to constantly remind Black people that you are oppressed, this country hates you, and because this country hates you, you need to vote this way, you need to think this way, you need to, in a sense, be entitled. And so it's offering a different perspective, if you will. The film also shows how, to the extent that you have these so-called Black organizations, like the NAACP, like Black Lives Matter, like these organizations that are all about Blackness, asserting Blackness, when you lift up the veil, when you pull back the curtain, what you find behind these so-called Black organizations are white Marxists.
Yep.
And so it's important to showcase that, because this whole pejorative of Uncle Tom, it's meant to silence individuals like Herman Cain, like Larry Elder, like Thomas Sowell. Because if you listen to Thomas Sowell, if you listen to Larry Elder, if you listen to Alan West, you'll find that these guys actually know what the heck they're talking about. And to the extent that people apply what it is they're saying, they will be benefited not only as Black folks, but as people in general. And so you don't want such a man to have a kind of effect on the masses of people, let alone Black people. And so you want to, in a sense, demonize them and ostracize them and make them look as a kind of parasite amongst the masses of Black people. So you're going to call them this pejorative, Uncle Tom, coon, bootlicker, sellout, so on and so forth, because you want to silence them. So we demonstrate that to the extent that these so-called Black liberal activists are using these pejoratives, they themselves are having their puppet strings pulled by who? White Marxists. And so at the end of the day, I don't care whether ideology is coming from a white person or a Black person. I don't care, because race isn't that important to me. But to the extent that I can expose that the people behind these so-called Black, pro-Black individuals are actually white Marxists, once we can get that out of the way, then we can have a conversation about what actually matters.
I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
And I am ready to answer. Am I a Marxist? Let's get into it. Hey everybody, my name is Patrice Cullors. I am the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. I'm also the executive director of the Black Lives Matter Global Network. Hey y'all, I mean, let's just talk about it. Am I a Marxist? I'm a lot of things. I do believe in Marxism. It's a philosophy that I learned really early on in my organizing career.
Then we can have a conversation about what actually matters. And what actually matters is ideology. And what kind of manifestations does ideology have on the way in which people are actually living, and whether or not people are prospering or whether they're constantly failing? Baltimore is an example of how we're failing under Marxism. Detroit is an example of how we're actually failing under Marxism. South side of Chicago, all of these organizations cities are examples of how we're failing under our Marxism. We went your way. We applied your policies. We applied what it is you're pushing, what it is you're selling, and black people are not being benefited by it. And so
these woke leftists, they're the same kind of people that were pro-slavery. They're the same kind of people that just want the status quo, and they're hiding behind the revolutionary ideas. But it's not the case.
Yeah,
there's a story I like to cite where a teacher asked his students, "How many of you would have opposed slavery in the time of the American Civil War?" And all the kids raised their hand. He's like, "Oh, okay. So tell me something that you'll publicly admit to supporting that's deeply unpopular and incites anger and hatred." And they don't have anything to say. The point was that most of these kids were just doing whatever they thought would get them to fit in. Yeah. And when you look at, I remember reading about Frederick Douglass, and he challenged Americans to live by the standard of their own constitution, the words that they wrote and swear allegiance to. Will they uphold that all men are created equal, that these rights exist for everybody? And then a bunch of people got pissed off at him, a bunch of white racists. Those are the people who are like, don't you screw with what I got. The left thinks that they're revolutionaries, but they're supporting the corporations, they're supporting the FBI, they're supporting the government and its policies and its machine, and they're demonizing. I'll give you an example. Antifa is the perfect example of this. This is who I think of. Overwhelmingly white. They know it. They love wearing masks because they don't want anyone to realize it. And I watched white Antifa scream at a black ICE officer the N-word, and I've personally witnessed white Antifa screaming the N-word at a black Proud Boy. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, all of those Antifa, they're all white, every single one of them. And then over here on the Proud Boy side is like Mexican guy, and there's like a Filipino guy, and there's a couple black guys, and there's a bunch of white guys. And I'm like, isn't that so strange? That's the case. There are people who believe in individual liberties, and there are people who believe in just do as the mob says or else.
Yeah. Yeah, you're 100% right. And that's we depict that in our film. We talk about people like Saul Alinsky. We talk about who the real kind of founder of Black Lives Matter is. It is a white Marxist. People look at these, 3 black women and think they started this organization because of Trayvon Martin and because of their being fed up with the police brutality that the police are constantly kind of dashing out against, black, black and, individuals who can't protect themselves. When in reality, no, that's not the case at all. It is a white man who subscribes to Marxist ideology who is training these people by his own admission. He says that I go after women, Black and Latino women. I train them to be revolutionaries. I train them to start organizations. We depict that in this film. And so one of the things that we set out to do in making Uncle Tom 2 is we didn't want to, in a sense, regurgitate the same old conservative talking points. We wanted to go deeper. We wanted to show people where this ideology is based out of. And so this film, in my opinion, is superior to Uncle Tom 2, is in the sense that we take people deeper to see where all of this comes from, so as to not be constantly intimidated by whatever social justice movement comes along in a given era.
So you're trying to tell me when Joe Biden said you're not black if you don't vote for him that he was wrong?
Well, I think one of the things I'm most proud about part 2 and the work that we've done is just really getting to the core of America. What made America? What made America was our worldview, our Christian ethic, and being a moral people, and if you look at the history of Marxism in this country, their number one goal was to demoralize us as a people. And if you just take Black America just as a microcosm of America, if you look at the footage that we show you in this film, Black America was a very prosperous, very entrepreneurial spirit, very moral people, very church-going, very nuclear family. All those things were happening for Black America in the early 1900s. And what the Marxists were able to do was slowly demoralize Black America, and now we're seeing the effect of America at large, is just to take our morals away from us and create chaos, and with the Christian worldview that America was built on, you had order, there was a foundation in God, and that created a set of rules, a way to do things, a way to do life. And that has been the goal and the tactic to destroy our country, is to slowly chip away at those morals and those values. And so I think, in my opinion, what we've put together in Uncle Tom 2 really showcases how this happened like no other film. And I think that, you know, what we're getting from people that are watching it and writing us is that it really equips them, it arms them with the knowledge that they really couldn't articulate themselves.
Yeah.
It gives them the ability to understand what they knew but they couldn't articulate.
Yeah.
And I think that we've labored over this film for the past 2 years to, you know, because explaining Marxism is hard to do.
Yeah.
It's very hard to do, to explain these ideas. You know, the first film was much easier to put together because conservatism is pretty easy to explain. But Marxism is rooted in deception, so it's hard to untangle that for people.
Right on.
And I feel people are expressing that Uncle Tom 2 is giving them that confidence to talk about these issues.
Yeah, in a nutshell, like the way that I would explain it is like what Marxists understood, Tim, is that to the extent that they wanted to inject their ideology into the American society, they were having a very hard time doing it because the culture that existed in America was very antithetical to the communist worldview. And so the fact of the matter is that culture, like how does cultures persist? Cultures persist generationally through children. You instill and impart your culture to your children, and then they carry it on into the future. And so what the Marxists resolved to do is that if we can get into the culture of the children, if we can, in a sense, cause them to rebel against the adult generation, to reject the culture of the adult generation, we can, in a sense, inject our culture and our society and our worldview into the youth to where, you know, the trajectory of our country is completely different. And so when you look at second wave feminism in the 60s, when you look at the hippie movement in the 60s, when you look at the free love movement in the 60s, when you look at the civil rights movement, when you look at the black militant movement, all of these are rebellious to the adult generation of the 60s. And what they were able to do was to demoralize a culture to where they are rejecting the adult generation and are adopting this kind of new worldview to the extent to where today more young people under the age of 30 are embracing socialism than any other youth generation before in this country. That goes to show that what Yuri Bezmenov talks about, who was a defected, who defected from the KGB, it goes to show that what he talked about actually played out the way that he described it. And so, yes, this is something that has taken place in our country. Uncle Tom 2 describes it in a very palatable way, in a sense, in a way that no other film that I've seen have been able to break it down. So,
all right, we're gonna go to Super Chats. If you haven't already.